The mahogany casket of billionaire Jonathan Davenport lay draped in 1,000 white roses, a testament to a life of immense wealth and power. In the front pew of Boston's grandest cathedral sat his beautiful, composed widow, Genevieve, the perfect picture of aristocratic grief. The city's elite watched her, their hushed whispers, a symphony of pity and admiration. But that symphony shattered when the heavy oak doors creaked open. A woman plainly dressed, but with an unbreakable strength in her eyes, walked down the aisle. Clinging to her hands were two small children, a boy and a girl, with Jonathan Davenport's unmistakable sapphire blue eyes. They were his living image. A single horrified gasp echoed through the cavernous space. The funeral was no longer about the man in the casket. It was about the two women who were about to tear his legacy apart. The organ music of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor filled the vaulted ceilings of Trinity Church, each note, a heavy, ornate stone of sorrow laid upon the silent congregation. Before the altar, Jonathan Davenport, a titan of industry and a pillar of Boston society, lay at rest. His death, a sudden and shocking heart attack at the age of 48, had sent ripples through the financial world and the city's upper crust. In the front pew, Genevieve Beaumont Davenport sat with the ramrod straight posture of a woman bred for control. Her black Givenchy dress was a whisper of restrained elegance. A single strand of inherited pearls, a cool testament to her status. A delicate veil of French netting partially obscured her face, but it could not hide the glint of triumph that mingled with her carefully curated grief. For 20 years she had been Mrs. Jonathan Davenport. She had hosted his galas, charmed his business partners, and tolerated his long, unexplained absences. She had played her part flawlessly, and now she was about to receive her reward, the keys to an empire. Her gaze swept over the attendees. The mayor was in the third row. The board of Davenport Industries filled the pews to her left. Her friend Penelope Croft squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of solidarity. Everything was as it should be. A somber, dignified farewell for a great man with his grieving, loyal widow at the center of it all. It was a performance, and Genevieve was its star. That was when the ancient oak doors at the back of the church groaned open, letting in a shaft of pale autumn light. The sound, a sharp break in the solemn music, caused a ripple of heads to turn. First came a few curious glances, then a wave of audible murmurs that the organ could not drown. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway. She was not dressed for a funeral of this caliber. Her simple navy blue dress was neat and respectable, but it lacked the designer label that was the unspoken uniform of this crowd. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her face, though pale with sorrow, was devoid of makeup. She was an island of stark reality in an ocean of polished pretense. But it was not the woman herself that caused the collective intake of breath. It was the two small children whose hands she held firmly in her own. They were about 4 years old, a boy and a girl dressed in matching gray coats. As they stepped further into the light, the truth became a physical blow. They had Jonathan's thick, dark hair. They had his determined chin, and when they looked around the vast, intimidating space, their eyes, a brilliant, unmistakable sapphire blue, were identical to the ones in the large portrait of Jonathan that stood beside his casket. They were his mirror image. Serafina Hayes felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on her as she began the long walk down the center aisle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the slow, mournful organ. She had promised Jonathan she would never do this, never create a scene, never disrupt the carefully constructed world he maintained. But Jonathan was gone, and his last whispered instructions over the phone, just hours before he died, had been clear. If anything happens to me, Fina, you make sure they know. You make sure our children are seen. The whispers grew louder, more venomous. Who is that? Look at those children. My God, they're his. Genevieve is going to have a fit. Serafina ignored them. Her focus was on the polished casket at the front of the church. This was for him. This was for Leo and Lily. She walked with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any shout. Her steps were measured, her expression one of genuine, unadorned grief. She wasn't here to make a claim, she was here to say goodbye. As they drew level with the front pews, the music faltered and then ceased altogether. The organist, catching sight of the scene, had lost his place. The silence that descended was more profound than the music had ever been. Genevieve turned her head slowly, her movements stiff with disbelief. She saw the woman. She saw the children. For a moment, her mind refused to process the image. This had to be a mistake. Some distant, disgraced relative. But then she saw their eyes. Jonathan's eyes. Staring back at her from the faces of two children she had never seen before. The veil could no longer hide the truth. Her perfectly composed mask of sorrow cracked, revealing the furious, raw panic beneath. Her knuckles, gripping a black lace handkerchief, turned white. "Who are you?" Genevieve's voice was a low, dangerous hiss cutting through the silence. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Serafina stopped positioning herself so the children were slightly behind her. She met the icy glare of the woman who was in the eyes of the world, her beloved's wife. "My name is Serafina Hayes," she said, her voice clear and steady, though it cost her every ounce of her strength. "And these are Leo and Lily. We've come to say goodbye to their father." The word father hung in the air like a guillotine. A collective gasp rippled through the church. Penelope Croft's hand flew to her mouth. Robert Vance Jonathan's longtime business partner and friend looked down at his shoes as if hoping the floor would swallow him. He had suspected had seen the hidden expenditures and the secret weekend flights, but had never dared to confirm it. Genevieve rose to her feet, her body trembling with a rage so potent it was almost visible. "Get out!" she seethed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that carried to the first 10 rows. "Get out of this church right now. You will not desecrate my husband's memory with your filth." Little Leo, sensing the hostility, tightened his grip on his mother's hand and started to cry softly. Lily hid her face in the folds of Serafina's dress. Serafina did not back down. She had come too far. She had lived in the shadows for 6 years, loved a man she could never claim, and raised his children in secret. She would not be dismissed as filth. "We have every right to be here," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "Jonathan loved them. He was their father." "Lies," Genevieve spat, taking a step forward. "Jonathan was a good man. He would never." Her voice broke, not with grief, but with the sheer fury of her perfect world being dismantled before her very eyes. 2 ushers, sensing an imminent explosion, began to move hesitantly toward the aisle. But before they could intervene, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Mrs. Davenport, please." Alistair Finch Jonathan's personal attorney for over 30 years stepped out from a side pew. He was a tall, thin man with a gravitas that commanded respect. He adjusted his spectacles and looked from Genevieve to Serafina, his expression unreadable. "This is neither the time nor the place," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We will settle all matters in due course. For now we are here to honor Jonathan. Let us proceed with the service." His intervention acted as a splash of cold water. Genevieve, realizing she was making a scene in front of the entire city, shot a look of pure hatred at Serafina before sinking back into her seat, her body rigid. The ushers retreated. Mr. Finch gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Serafina, then gestured to an empty pew across the aisle. Serafina, understanding, led her children to the seat. As she sat down, she felt the burn of 100 hostile stares, but she also felt a strange sense of peace. The first step was over. The secret was out. Now, whatever came next, she would face it in the light. The organist, taking his cue, began to play again. A soft, hesitant hymn this time. The funeral continued, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. No one was listening to the eulogies. They were all watching the two women, the two worlds of Jonathan Davenport, sitting on opposite sides of the aisle, separated by a chasm of secrets and lies, waiting for the inevitable war to begin. The penthouse apartment on Commonwealth Avenue was less a home and more a museum of modern success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the Boston skyline, a view Jonathan had once called the spoils of war. The furniture was Italian minimalist and punishingly uncomfortable. Art chosen by a consultant for its investment potential hung on stark white walls. There was no clutter, no warmth, no sign that people truly lived there, only that they existed in a state of curated perfection. This was the world Genevieve had built with Jonathan, or rather the world she had maintained. Their marriage 20 years ago had been a merger. She brought the Beaumont name, old money, impeccable social standing, a lineage tracing back to the Mayflower. He brought the Davenport Drive, a relentless new money ambition that had turned his father's modest construction company into a global real estate empire. It was a perfect match, celebrated in the society pages as the union of the year. Their life together had been a series of meticulously planned events. Charity galas, where Genevieve's smile never wavered as she secured six-figure donations. Dinner parties where Jonathan closed deals over port and cigars. Vacations to St. Bart's or Gstaad, less for pleasure and more for the photo opportunities and the networking. Love had never been the primary currency of their relationship. Respect, ambition, and a shared understanding of their roles were the foundation. Genevieve had known on some level that Jonathan wasn't a man built for monogamy. In the early years, there had been whispers, a secretary, a young architect, a fleeting affair during a business trip to Hong Kong. Genevieve had handled them with practiced indifference. She saw them as trivial business expenses, the cost of maintaining a man of his appetite and stature. As long as he was discreet, as long as he never ever embarrassed her, she didn't care. Her position as Mrs. Davenport was unassailable. The prenuptial agreement which she had insisted upon was ironclad. In the event of his death, she was the sole heir to the Davenport personal fortune, with a controlling interest in the company. She was secure. A memory sharp and unwelcome surfaced from 2 years prior. It was their 18th anniversary. Genevieve had arranged a dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Jonathan had been late. He'd arrived flustered, smelling faintly of something sweet and floral, not his usual sandalwood cologne. "Sorry, darling," he'd said, kissing the air beside her cheek. "The London call ran long." "Of course," she'd replied, her voice smooth as silk. She hadn't believed him. There was a looseness to his collar, a relaxed set to his shoulders that didn't come from a transatlantic conference call. It came from something softer, something more intimate. Throughout the dinner, he'd been distracted, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He kept glancing at it, a small, secret smile playing on his lips. Genevieve had felt a prickle of something unfamiliar, not jealousy, but annoyance. It was a breach of protocol. Whatever his diversions were, they were supposed to remain in the shadows, not intrude upon their carefully scheduled time together. "Is everything all right, Jonathan?" she'd asked, her tone laced with a hint of steel. He'd looked up startled, his blue eyes momentarily unfocused before locking onto hers. "Everything's perfect. Just a minor issue with the new Dubai project." He'd switched the phone off and put it away. "Now to us. 18 years. Can you believe it?" He had raised his glass, and she had dutifully raised hers, but the moment felt hollow. The smile he gave her was the same one he gave to newspaper photographers. It didn't reach his eyes. His real thoughts, his real self, were a million miles away. After that night, the business trips became more frequent. Weekends disappeared. He'd call from Singapore or Tokyo, the connection conveniently poor. He'd send extravagant gifts, a Cartier bracelet, a rare first-edition book she'd once mentioned wanting. They were guilt offerings, and she accepted them as such. She saw it as a sign of her power. He was placating her, ensuring she remained content in her gilded cage while he played his games. The idea that these games might involve something more than a fleeting dalliance never seriously occurred to her. An emotional connection. A parallel life. That was the stuff of cheap novels, not the carefully managed world of the Boston elite. Jonathan had never wanted children with her. In their first year of marriage, she had broached the subject. "An heir is important for the Davenport name," she'd said, as if discussing a business strategy. He had deflected, "We have plenty of time." But plenty of time had stretched into years, then a decade. He was always too busy. The company was at a critical stage. It wasn't the right time. Eventually, she had stopped asking. A child would have been a complication, a messy, unpredictable variable in their pristine lives. She had convinced herself she was relieved. Her legacy was the Beaumont Davenport name, the social standing, the empire she would one day help control. The last time she had seen him alive was on the Monday before he died. He was packing an overnight bag in his dressing room, a space as Spartan and impersonal as a hotel suite. "Another trip?" she'd asked, leaning against the doorframe, examining her manicure. "Just to the coast. A quick site visit for the new coastal development. I'll be back Wednesday," he'd said, not meeting her eye. "Don't work too hard," she'd replied, the words a meaningless script they both knew by heart. He had paused at the door on his way out. For a moment, he looked at her, a strange expression on his face. It was almost sad. Regretful. "Genevieve," he'd started, then stopped. He shook his head. "Take care of yourself." Then, he was gone. He died on Tuesday, not on the coast, but in a hospital, in a quiet suburban town, an hour outside of Boston, a place she hadn't even known he ever visited. The official report said he had collapsed while jogging. The truth, she was beginning to realize with sickening horror, was far more complex. Now, sitting in the cold, silent church, the memory of that last look, that last unfinished sentence, haunted her. He had been trying to tell her something, or perhaps he had been saying goodbye. The appearance of that woman, Serafina, and those children was not just an embarrassment. It was a declaration of war. It was an assault on everything Genevieve had built, everything she was owed. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a betrayal on an epic scale. A second life, a second family, hidden just out of sight. Her grief, already a fabrication, evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Jonathan had not just been unfaithful. He had made her a fool. In front of the entire city. She looked across the aisle at the woman and the two small, dark-haired children. The boy was now asleep on his mother's lap, and the girl was watching the stained glass windows, her little face a miniature replica of Jonathan's. They were not filth. They were a threat. The greatest threat she had ever faced. The funeral service was a blur. The eulogies, the prayers, the hymns, they were all just noise. Genevieve's mind was racing her lawyer's number already at the forefront of her thoughts. She would crush this woman. She would erase her and her bastard children from the Davenport story. She would prove they were nothing but opportunistic frauds. She had to. Because if they were real, then her entire life, her entire marriage had been the real fraud. And that was a truth Genevieve Beaumont Davenport could not afford to face. Just 60 miles west of Boston, nestled in the quiet, tree-lined town of Amherst, stood a modest two-story colonial house. It was painted a cheerful shade of blue, with a porch swing and window boxes overflowing with geraniums. A well-worn tricycle lay on its side in the front yard near a small garden where tomato vines were just beginning to fruit. This was Serafina Hayes's world, and for 5 years, it had been Jonathan Davenport's sanctuary. He wasn't Jonathan Davenport here. He was just John, a freelance architectural consultant whose work required frequent travel. That was the story they told the neighbors, and it was simple enough to be believable. Here he traded his Brioni suits for worn jeans and soft flannel shirts. He didn't command boardrooms. He wrestled with his children on the living room rug, his deep laughter echoing through the small house. Serafina had met him 6 years ago. She was a librarian working on a master's degree in archival studies, and he had come into the Boston Public Library researching historical building codes for a restoration project. He hadn't introduced himself as a billionaire. He was just a man with kind, tired eyes and a passion for architecture that matched her own passion for history. They talked for hours that first day about Ionic columns and forgotten manuscripts. He was brilliant, funny, and he listened to her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. When he finally asked her to dinner, she said yes without hesitation. The truth of his identity came out a few weeks later. He confessed it over a simple meal in a North End trattoria, his voice low and full of shame. He told her about Genevieve, about the merger of a marriage, the gilded cage he had built for himself. "I should have walked away then," she would later tell her best friend Maria. "The moment he said, 'I'm married,' I should have run." But she hadn't. She had seen the profound loneliness in his eyes, the desperate hunger for a normal life that his wealth could never buy. He wasn't offering her a life of glamour. He was offering her the pieces of himself that he kept hidden from the world. Their relationship grew in stolen moments, walks along the Charles River, hidden cafes, and weekends away, where he could shed the weight of his name. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified. She had offered to handle it on her own, to disappear completely and never bother him again. It was the first time she had ever seen him cry. "No," he had said, his voice thick with emotion as he held her in his arms. "No. This baby, this is the first real thing that's happened to me in 20 years. We're keeping it. We're a family." And then the ultrasound revealed it was twins. He bought the house in Amherst, a place far from the prying eyes of Boston society. He set up a series of private accounts and trusts, a complex financial web designed to provide for them without ever being traced back to him directly. He was meticulous, a master of compartmentalization. His life with Genevieve was the firm, as he grimly called it. His life with Serafina and the twins was home. He was a devoted father. He was there for their birth, a nervous wreck in hospital scrubs. He was the one who taught Leo how to throw a baseball, and the one who read Lily Princess stories until his voice was hoarse. He never missed a birthday. He would arrive on a Friday evening, his face etched with the exhaustion of his corporate life, but the moment he saw them, the lines would soften, and he would become just Daddy. Serafina knew the arrangement was precarious. The secrecy was a constant low-level ache in her heart. She couldn't have photos of him on the mantelpiece. Her children's birth certificates listed the father as undisclosed for their protection. She had few friends in town afraid of anyone getting too close and asking too many questions. "When will you tell her?" she had asked him one night after the children were asleep. They were sitting on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of pine and honeysuckle. "When can we stop hiding?" Jonathan sighed, the sound heavy with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. He leaned his head back and looked up at the stars, so much clearer here than in the city. "It's not that simple, Fina," he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. "Genevieve's family. They're entwined in every corner of the company. A divorce wouldn't just be a divorce. It would be a corporate demolition. It would be war. She would try to destroy you. She would try to take the children." "So we just live like this forever?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. His were warm and strong. "No. I promise you no. I am making a plan. A permanent solution. It's unconventional, but it will protect you and the twins no matter what. It will make sure you have everything you deserve. Just trust me. Please just trust me a little longer." She had trusted him. She had believed that his brilliant mind, which could conceive and execute billion-dollar projects, was also working on a plan for their future. She just never imagined that the plan was contingent on his own death. The call had come from a doctor at Cooley Dickinson Hospital. There had been an incident. A man matching his description had collapsed on a jogging trail. He had a wallet with a driver's license bearing the name John Smith, but in his pocket was a small laminated card. On it was Serafina's name and phone number with the words, "In case of emergency, call my wife." Her world had imploded. Rushing to the hospital, leaving the sleeping twins with a bewildered Maria, she had arrived just in time to see them pronounce him dead. The official cause was a massive coronary thrombosis. He was gone, amidst the fog of her own shattering grief. His last words to her from a phone call the morning of his death echoed in her mind. He was checking in as he always did. He'd told her he loved her. He'd told her he loved Leo and Lily more than life itself. And then he had added almost as an afterthought, "Fina, I've updated the plan. Alistair Finch knows everything. If anything ever happens to me, call him. And don't be afraid. Make sure our children are seen. It's the most important thing." Making the walk down that church aisle had been the hardest thing she had ever done. It felt like a betrayal of their secret, quiet love, but it was also the fulfillment of his final wish. He had spent years protecting them in the shadows, and now it was her job to ensure they were finally seen in the light. She looked at Leo and Lily now, safely back in their own beds in the little blue house. They knew their daddy was gone. They thought he was a star in the sky now, watching over them. They were too young to understand the complexity, the scandal, the battle that was to come. They only knew the man who built block towers with them and gave the best piggyback rides was never coming home. Serafina clutched a framed photo she kept hidden in her closet. It was the only one she had of the four of them together, taken with a self-timer on a sunny afternoon in their backyard. Jonathan was holding Lily on his shoulders, and Leo was perched on his lap, all of them laughing, their faces filled with pure, uncomplicated joy. This was the truth. This was the reality of Jonathan Davenport's life. Genevieve could have the penthouse and the society pages. This little house, these two sleeping children, and this one secret photograph, this was his heart. And Serafina would fight to the death to protect it. The law offices of Finch, Abernathy, and Crowe were a bastion of old-world power located on the top floor of a granite skyscraper overlooking Boston Harbor. The air inside was still and smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and money. The conference room where the will was to be read was dominated by a colossal mahogany table polished to such a high sheen it reflected the grim faces of those gathered around it. Genevieve sat at the head of the table, flanked by her own formidable attorney, a shark named Lawrence Prentice. She had spent the 2 days since the funeral in a state of controlled fury, marshalling her forces. She had private investigators digging into every corner of Serafina Hayes's life, searching for any dirt, any weakness that could be used to discredit her. Prentice had already assured her this was an open and shut case of a gold-digging opportunist making a fraudulent claim. The prenuptial agreement was their shield and their sword. Across the gleaming expanse of wood sat Serafina. She had come alone. She had declined Alistair Finch's offer to arrange for her own counsel, an act Genevieve interpreted as either naivety or foolish arrogance. Serafina looked small and out of place in the imposing leather chair, but her back was straight, and her hands, though clasped tightly in her lap, were steady. She projected an aura of quiet resolve that Genevieve found intensely irritating. Alistair Finch sat at the opposite head of the table, a thick leather-bound portfolio before him. He exuded an air of solemn neutrality, his face a mask of professional duty. With him was Robert Vance, the CFO of Davenport Industries and Jonathan's oldest friend. His presence was required as the executor of the will alongside Finch. Vance had refused to meet Genevieve's gaze, since entering the room his discomfort palpable. "If we are all present," Mr. Finch began, his voice dry as parchment, "we shall proceed. I am here today to read the last will and testament of Jonathan Edward Davenport, executed on the 15th of June, 2024. He cleared his throat and opened the portfolio. Genevieve leaned forward slightly, her entire being focused on the words to come. This was the final act, the moment her long performance would be validated and rewarded. "I, Jonathan Edward Davenport, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all former wills and codicils." Finch's voice was a steady, emotionless monotone. He began with the standard bequests. A sizable donation to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where Genevieve sat on the board. A generous fund for his alma mater, MIT. Smaller, but still significant sums for various cousins and long-serving employees of his company. With each bequest, Genevieve felt a knot of tension loosen. It was all proceeding exactly as she expected. It was the will of a responsible philanthropic titan of industry. "To my dear friend and trusted partner, Robert Vance," Finch continued, "I bequeath my collection of vintage watches and the sum of $1 million in gratitude for his years of loyalty and discretion." Robert Vance swallowed hard, his face paling slightly at the word discretion. He knew what Jonathan meant. He knew about the secret accounts, the carefully hidden transactions that he had helped facilitate, always under the guise of private investment vehicles. Now came the main event. Finch paused and took a sip of water. The silence in the room was absolute. "To my wife, Genevieve Beaumont Davenport," he read, and Genevieve's heart gave a triumphant leap. "I leave the following our primary residence, the penthouse apartment on Commonwealth Avenue, with all its contents, furnishings, and art." Genevieve nodded. It was theirs, but really, it was hers. She had chosen every piece. I also leave to her the villa in Tuscany and the chalet in Gstaad, Switzerland, to enjoy for the remainder of her life. Prentice, her lawyer, scribbled a note, a small smile playing on his lips. This was going well. Furthermore, I bequeath to my wife Genevieve a sum of $20 million to be paid from my personal accounts. This sum is provided in accordance with our prenuptial agreement to ensure she continues to live in the comfort to which she has become accustomed. The amount, though substantial, was less than she had anticipated. A mere fraction of his personal wealth, which was estimated to be north of $500 million, not including the company itself. A sliver of unease crept into her composure. "And that is all," Prentice interjected, unable to hide his surprise. "What about his shares in Davenport Industries, his controlling interest?" Alistair Finch held up a hand. "Please, Mr. Prentice, allow me to finish." He adjusted his glasses and continued reading from the document. "All the rest residue and remainder of my estate, including all personal property financial accounts investment portfolios, and my entire 61% controlling interest in Davenport Industries, I bequeath to the Davenport Legacy Trust to be managed by the appointed trustees." A trust. Genevieve's mind reeled. Jonathan had set up a trust. This was unexpected. Complicated. Who were the trustees? And more importantly, who were the beneficiaries? Finch continued, his voice unwavering. "The trustees of the Davenport Legacy Trust shall be Alistair Finch and Robert Vance." Genevieve stared at Robert, who looked as though he might faint. He was a trustee. He would control the company. This was a betrayal. "And the beneficiary?" Prentice demanded, his voice sharp. "Who is the beneficiary of this trust?" This was the moment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Serafina, who had remained silent and still, finally lifted her gaze to meet Finch's. The old lawyer looked down at the document, then over the rim of his glasses, first at Genevieve, then at Serafina. He took a slow, deliberate breath, as if bracing for the explosion to come. "There appears to be a separate sealed document attached to the will," he announced, his tone carefully neutral. "A codicil. It is dated just 3 months ago and was delivered to my office by Mr. Davenport himself, with express instructions that it be opened and read only at this time in the presence of all concerned parties." He produced a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a heavy wax stamp, bearing the Davenport family crest. The sight of it sent a chill down Genevieve's spine. This was not part of the plan. This was an aberration. "This is highly irregular," Prentice blustered. "We should verify its authenticity." "I can assure you it is authentic," Finch said coolly. "I personally witnessed the signature, as did my partner, Mr. Abernathy. It is legally unimpeachable." With a small, sharp letter opener, Finch slit the envelope. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. He withdrew a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Jonathan's familiar, strong script. This was not a document drafted by lawyers. This was from Jonathan himself. Finch began to read. The words that followed would not just outline the distribution of an estate. They would detonate a bomb in the center of the room, shattering a 20-year marriage and the carefully constructed legacy of Jonathan Davenport. And as he spoke, Genevieve felt the polished mahogany floor fall away beneath her feet. The hidden will was about to be revealed. Alistair Finch held the handwritten letter, his knuckles white. For a moment, he seemed to be gathering himself, the professional mask slipping, to reveal a hint of the heavy burden his client had placed upon him. He knew the contents of this letter would irrevocably alter the lives of everyone in the room. This document, he began, his voice taking on a new, more personal tone, is a codicil and personal directive from Jonathan. He asked that I read it in its entirety without interruption. He looked pointedly at Genevieve and her lawyer before his eyes settled on the page. He writes, "To whom it may concern, but most especially to Genevieve and to Serafina. If you are reading this, it means my time has run out, and I have left behind a mess of my own making. For that I am profoundly sorry. I have not been an honest man, but I have tried in my own flawed way to be a good one. I have lived 2 lives, and in doing so, I have failed 2 remarkable women. This letter, and the legal instructions that follow, are my attempt to finally set things right." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. A personal address. A confession. This was a nightmare. "Genevieve," Finch read on Jonathan's voice, seeming to echo in the still air. "Our marriage was a partnership, a successful one by the world's standards. We built an empire together, and I will always respect you for your intelligence, your grace, and your strength. I have provided for you in a way that befits that partnership. The houses, the money, they are yours. A severance package for a long and fruitful business relationship. I know that sounds cold, but we both know the warmth between us faded long ago. I am sorry for my dishonesty, but I am not sorry for finding a happiness I never knew was possible. This is an outrage." Prentice slammed his hand on the table. "This is a character assassination, not a legal document." "It is a legally binding codicil, Mr. Prentice." Finch countered, his voice like ice. "And I will remind you of my client's instruction not to be interrupted." He returned to the letter, his gaze shifting to Serafina, who was listening with tears silently streaming down her face. "Serafina," he read, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "My dearest Fina, you were my shelter from the storm. You gave me what money and power never could a home. You saw the man, not the brand. You gave me the 2 greatest gifts of my life. You gave me Leo and Lily." At the mention of the children's names, Genevieve let out a choked, incredulous sound. It was true. It was all true. "It is to them, my children, my heirs, that I leave my true legacy. It is my deepest regret that I did not have the courage to acknowledge them in life. I was a coward, afraid of the scandal, afraid of the war a divorce would bring. I chose to protect my business instead of my family. I will carry that shame with me always. I can only hope that in death I can give them the security and the name I was too weak to give them in life." Finch paused, allowing the weight of the confession to settle. Robert Vance stared at the table, his face ashen. He had been Jonathan's friend for 30 years, and he had never known the depth of his turmoil. "Therefore," Finch continued, his voice returning to a formal, legalistic cadence, "I hereby declare the sole beneficiaries of the Davenport Legacy Trust to be my legally acknowledged children, Leo Davenport and Lily Davenport." The room went completely silent. The sound of Genevieve's sharp, ragged breathing was the only thing to be heard. "Legally acknowledged," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's impossible." Alistair Finch reached back into the portfolio without looking at her. He placed 3 documents on the polished table and slid them across to Prentice. "It is not impossible, Mrs. Davenport," he said calmly. "It is merely a fact you were not privy to. The first document is a court-certified declaration of paternity signed by Jonathan 6 months ago. The second and third are the amended birth certificates for the children officially naming Jonathan Edward Davenport as their father. And here," he added, pulling out another file, "are the results of a DNA test Jonathan had performed last year. There is a 99.999% probability that he is their biological father. It is all, as I said, unimpeachable. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Genevieve's world. The carefully constructed facade of her life had been systematically, ruthlessly demolished by the husband she thought she controlled. "What does this mean?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "What does this trust entail?" Finch turned to the final paragraph of Jonathan's letter. "The Davenport Legacy Trust will hold my entire 61% controlling interest in Davenport Industries, as well as the bulk of my liquid assets amounting to approximately $450 million. The income from this trust is to be used for the health, education, maintenance, and support of my children Leo and Lily Davenport. Their mother, Serafina Hayes, is to be named the sole guardian and trustee administrator with a generous yearly stipend to allow her to raise our children without financial concern. Upon their 25th birthdays, the children will assume joint control of the trust and its assets. In this way, the Davenport legacy will pass not to a business partner, but to my bloodline, to my family." The final word family hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Genevieve's heart. He had left his entire empire, his life's work, to a librarian and her bastard children. He had left Genevieve the houses, the gilded cages, and a cash settlement that in the context of the total fortune was little more than an insult. Serafina was weeping openly now, not with joy, but with the overwhelming sorrow of it all. This was his plan, his unconventional permanent solution. It was a masterpiece of legal strategy executed from beyond the grave. He had sidestepped the prenuptial agreement, which only covered his personal assets in the event of a divorce, not their distribution through a trust upon his death. He had ensured his children were provided for in a way that no court could ever challenge. Genevieve slowly rose to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her eyes burning with a cold fire fixed on Serafina. "You!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You did this. You schemed and you manipulated him. You are a thief, a whore who has stolen my life." Serafina met her gaze. Her own eyes filled with a grief that Genevieve couldn't begin to comprehend. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just loved him, and he loved us." "Love?" Genevieve laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the silent room. "You know nothing of love. You know about money. But you will not see a single cent of it. I will fight this. I will drag you and your pathetic children through every court in this country. I will prove this is a fraud. I will destroy you." Her promise hung in the air, a declaration of total war. The battle for the Davenport legacy had just begun. Genevieve's vow of war was not an empty threat. In the weeks that followed the reading of the will, she unleashed a legal firestorm. Lawrence Prentice, fueled by his own bruised ego and Genevieve's bottomless thirst for vengeance, filed a motion to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. The Boston Society pages, which had once fawned over her, now feasted on the scandal with breathless glee. Anonymous sources, clearly Penelope Croft, and others from Genevieve's circle, painted Serafina as a cunning manipulator who had preyed on a vulnerable middle-aged man. They portrayed Jonathan as a man in the throes of a midlife crisis, not of sound mind, when he had drafted the codicil. They tried to subpoena Serafina's financial records, her phone logs, her personal journals, searching for any evidence of coercion. But Alistair Finch and the Truth were formidable opponents. Finch, acting on Jonathan's posthumous instructions, had prepared for this onslaught. He presented the court with a mountain of evidence that Jonathan had been anything but diminished. There were sworn affidavits from business associates, including a reluctant but honest Robert Vance, confirming that Jonathan was at the peak of his cognitive abilities, closing complex international deals in the very same week he signed the codicil. There were reports from his personal physician confirming he was in excellent mental health. The core of their defense, however, was Jonathan himself. Finch produced a series of video diaries Jonathan had recorded on his personal laptop, a final fail-safe he had put in place. In the videos, a clear-eyed and articulate Jonathan spoke directly to the camera. "I am recording this," he stated in the first entry dated the day after he signed the codicil, "because I anticipate that my final wishes will be viciously contested by my wife, Genevieve. Let me be unequivocally clear. I am of sound mind and body. My decision to make my children Leo and Lily my primary heirs is born not of manipulation, but of love, and a deep sense of paternal responsibility." He went on to detail his life with Serafina, speaking of their meeting, the birth of the twins, and the quiet joy he found in Amherst. He spoke with a clarity and emotional depth that was undeniable. He was not a man being controlled, he was a man finally taking control of his own truth. "I have hidden my family for too long," he said in the final video, his blue eyes staring intently into the lens. "I was a coward. But this trust. This is my final act of courage. It is my legacy. It belongs to them." When the videos were played during a closed-door hearing, the effect was devastating. Prentice's arguments about diminished capacity crumbled to dust. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, saw the case for what it was. During the proceedings, Genevieve's composure began to fray. Her public appearances became erratic. Once the epitome of cool elegance, she was now photographed looking haggard and thin, her eyes holding a haunted, desperate look. The carefully constructed world she had ruled was dissolving around her. Her friends in high society, who loved nothing more than a winner, began to distance themselves from the unfolding messy spectacle of her defeat. The invitations to galas and charity boards dried up. She was no longer the powerful Mrs. Davenport. She was the spurned wife, a public object of pity and scorn. The financial pressure mounted as well. Her legal fees were astronomical, and with her access to Jonathan's main accounts frozen, she was forced to start liquidating her own assets. The pristine life she had taken for granted was revealed to be entirely dependent on the man she had treated as a business partner. Meanwhile, Serafina remained in Amherst, shielded from the worst of the media circus by Alistair Finch. She did not give interviews. She did not issue statements. She focused on her children, trying to create a bubble of normalcy for them, amidst the chaos. She grieved for Jonathan, not the billionaire, but the man who read bedtime stories and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. She felt no triumph in Genevieve's downfall, only a profound sadness for the woman whose life had also been shattered by Jonathan's secrets. The final blow came not from the court, but from Robert Vance. Racked with guilt over his complicity in Jonathan's deception, he provided Finch with the last piece of the puzzle: access to a series of hidden corporate ledgers. They detailed the meticulous multi-year process by which Jonathan had siphoned funds into the shell corporations that supported Serafina and the twins. It was not the rash behavior of a man in a crisis. It was the long-term, calculated financial planning of a man building a second life. It proved beyond any doubt premeditation and clear intent. Faced with this irrefutable evidence, Lawrence Prentice had no choice but to advise Genevieve to drop the case. The fight was over. She had lost. The news was delivered to her in the sterile, silent living room of the penthouse. Prentice laid out the facts, the unwinnable nature of their position. When he finished, Genevieve stared out at the city skyline, the spoils of a war she had not won. For a long time, she said nothing. Then a single dry sob escaped her lips. It was not a sound of grief for her husband. It was the sound of utter and complete defeat. The sound of a queen checkmated, her entire board swept clean. "Get out, Lawrence," she whispered, not looking at him. When he was gone, she walked over to a large framed photograph on a side table. It was from their wedding day, 20 years ago. A young, fiercely ambitious Jonathan stood beside a radiant, confident Genevieve. They looked like they owned the world. With a sudden, violent cry of rage and despair, she swept the photo off the table. It crashed to the marble floor, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces, just like the life it represented. 6 months later, winter snow blanketed Amherst, muffling the world outside the blue colonial house. Inside, a fire crackled as Serafina built a block castle with Leo and Lily. They were happy and safe. That was all that mattered. As administrator of the Davenport Legacy Trust, she wielded immense power but had no interest in the corporate world. Guided by Jonathan's memory, her first act was to establish a charitable foundation to build affordable, sustainable housing, redirecting the company's purpose toward a legacy of compassion. She sold the cold Boston penthouse, decisively cutting ties with that life. Alistair Finch brought her a locked chest Jonathan had left behind. Inside, she found not stocks or jewels, but his heart photo albums of their hidden life. Unsent letters filled with love and regret, and at the bottom a detailed business plan for a small architectural firm named Hayes and Davenport. It was his dream of an authentic life with her, a life he was too afraid to claim while he lived. In contrast, Genevieve's world had collapsed. A social pariah, she became a recluse, selling off properties to cover her legal debts. Her name, once a symbol of power, was now a whispered cautionary tale about a life built on appearances. Watching her children by the fire, their faces reflecting the warm light, Serafina knew she was witnessing the true Davenport legacy. It wasn't in skyscrapers or stock prices, but in the promise of their future. Her mission was to ensure it would be a legacy of kindness and truth, all the things their father had found with her just in time to secure it for them, from beyond the grave. And so the story of Jonathan Davenport's 2 lives comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. It shows us that a person's true legacy isn't defined by the wealth they accumulate or the name they build, but by the love they give and the lives they touch. Serafina and her children didn't win a fortune. They reclaimed a birthright built on a hidden but powerful love. Genevieve's story is a tragic lesson in what happens when a life is built on pride and appearances rather than genuine connection. What did you think of this incredible story? Do you believe Jonathan did the right thing in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this tale of secrets, lies, and the explosive power of the truth, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a gripping story, and make sure you subscribe to our channel. Click that notification bell because you won't want to miss our next story.